What is the most used man-made material on Earth? You guessed right, it's concrete. Look around, it's everywhere. Sidewalks, driveways, foundations, floor you stand on, and even entire buildings are made out of concrete. So why don't we discuss it more? In each episode of Concrete Logic, we'll explore one concrete-related topic with the help from industry professionals that are shaping the future of the trade. We'll talk with suppliers, contractors, architects, engineers, specialists, and even some proponents of competing materials about their views of concrete and their vision of its future. Welcome to another episode of the Concrete Logic podcast. And today I have Rich Szecsy with me. And Rich, can you tell us a little bit about yourself for folks that may not know you?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me, Seth. Appreciate it. Like I said, my name is Rich Szecsy. I've been in the ready-mix concrete industry for over 25 years now. Spent a lot of that time in Texas and operating around the country. And now I'm currently the executive vice president with Alamo Concrete Products, headquartered down here in San Antonio.
Yeah. And folks might recognize you from World of Concrete. You were telling me yesterday on the phone that you're coming up on 20 years you've been presenting there. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been presenting there for just almost 20 years, and we do probably about 1,000 people per show. So I probably have spoken to over 20,000 plus people at World of Concrete alone. And they keep asking me back, so I'm not sure if they can't find anybody else to replace me yet, or they. Yeah.
Well, I like I shared with you, the reason I looked you up is because someone else on this podcast, shout out to Jamie Grimmelson, he recommended that I reach out to you. He said he sat through a presentation at World of Concrete that you presented, and he was like blown away, and he kept it. It was like I think it was like 15 years ago. He sent me the PDF of when he sat through your presentation, and so you make a big impact. So I think you're being very, very humble. So I appreciate you being on the show. So today, Rich, we've been talking a little bit before the show, and we talked a little bit yesterday. There's tons of things we could talk about, but I think both of us are pretty passionate about the sustainability, I guess, where concrete stands today as far as it comes to sustainable construction, and defining that. If you want to kick us off, where do you see it as you sit? Where do we stand as concrete? Are we sustainable or not?
Well, first, I think you step back just a little bit and look kind of at a history almost. I think we're in what I would call sustainability 2.0. And by that, I mean 15, 18 years ago, even 20 years ago, this whole green concrete, green building, sustainable movement was coming up out of the ground. And we were trying to wrap our arms around this thing. Organizations like the U.S. Green Building Council were starting to gain prominence and notice. You may have heard something called green cements, those type of things. We weren't even talking about words like carbon reduction, carbon footprint yet. It was just we tried to be sustainable, and I'm going to come back to this term again, green. But we had no idea what those meant. Then about 8 years ago, 10 years ago, you saw the development of something called an environmental product declaration form. What is that? A product category, a PCR. What is that? And what were they doing in Europe? And how is that trickling over? And you saw this huge flash in the pan of those documents, and things were very important. And how do we measure them? And other organizations were like, well, what's our approach to sustainability? And then that kind of normalized. And then all of a sudden, in the last 2 years, you've just seen this resurgence, reemergence, and refocus on this. And this is why I'm calling it Sustainability 2.0. Our terms have gotten better-ish. I'll talk about that in a second. And I think you've got more people that have now taken this a little bit more seriously. And so that's why I say we're kind of in this sustainability 2.0 renaissance. Um, and concrete, from a construction standpoint, is front and center on this, particularly when you consider the particular types of cements we're using now, or now narrowing down to with these 1Ls. And we'll talk about that in detail in a little bit as well. But yeah, I think it's an interesting point to be discussing it. It's an interesting place to be in our industry right now because of such a focus on this. And I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to deter that. I think this is not a fad anymore. This is how we're going to construct. This is how we're going to approach things. Um, but I think we have to, and that's 30,000-foot view. I think now the problem and challenge, like anything, is always in the details. The building, the structure looks great on paper or on the screen, but ultimately you still have to dig a hole with a shovel. So you still got the practical aspect of it at the field-based level, of how we actually implement, how we put these things into place. And I think that's where we are right now, is we're challenged with what does this now look like at the ground and granular level. So yeah, that's where I think we are right now.
Yeah, I think with it, with so many things to take take out of that. I think like you said, I think the last part there about being practical, I think that's the big thing at the moment. It seems like when we take on these things, we're trying to do it all. We're trying to do it all at once, and really we should be taking pieces and parts of it and being practical and doing the things that have the largest impact. And it seems like we're losing sight of that, I guess, from my point of view. It just seems like we're trying to, we're more worried about what we put on paper saying what we're doing versus what we're actually doing in the field.
No,
do you agree
I
with
agree.
that?
Yeah, and let me give you a great example of something I'm involved with right now. We have a very big project, a very big concrete supply project. They've got a massive amount of consultants that are focused on the sustainability decisions as how they affect sustainability. And one of the consultants on the phone in our conference call said, we are very focused on how our concrete decisions affect climate change. And I was like, that's a very bold statement. That's a very, that's a statement that carries a tremendous amount of weight and pressure on me as a little ready mix producer going, wait a minute, you're saying depending on how many rocks or sand or how much sand or water I put into the mix design affects climate change? And I'm not going to make the argument either way about, is this an issue? What I'm saying is your point about at the ground practical level, like it doesn't, that's a huge chain and leaps in logic to make. And so now as part of that, we said, okay, well, we'd like to, and their comment was, we'd really like you to focus on the pozzolanic replacement, more fly ash translation. And we said, great. We proposed mix designs that had 25 to 20% fly ash in them. We were ready to go. We maxed it out. But they were summarily rejected by the engineering group. And they said no more than 15% fly ash in the mix designs for the structures in which we're going to sign off on. And the consultants are looking at us like, well, wait a minute, that's not possible. We're supposed to be sustainable. I said, there's only so much we can do. We've tried, but somebody else said no outside of our control. So they didn't know what to do at this point. And my point was, guys, we tried. We're familiar with this. We know what we're doing. We don't need to practice. We've done this before. But the engineers, and I'm not pointing a finger at them. I'm just saying these are these practical decisions. You face these in the field every time when you see a set of shop drawings that says, oh yeah, install this bolt into this hole. And you're like, there's less than half an inch of space. You can't even get the bolt there, let alone the piece of hardware to turn the bolt in the nut. And so again, your point is, it looks great on paper, but when we come all the way down to the field, somebody at some point said, no, I'm not going to be responsible for that. So again, interesting when we see that kind of stuff. And the other part is, a much broader picture. And I mean, you've already poked the bear, so let me go ahead and keep poking it. Is as a ready mix industry, we have already been as sustainable as we possibly can. And I know that's a very strong statement, but I'm going to go ahead and back this up with some data. There is not a mix design, a yard of concrete that we send out the door, that any ready mix company sends out the door, that doesn't have the least amount of cement possible in it. We're in business to be in business, which means I need to be efficient. I need to be um, as optimized as I can with every yard of concrete. That means I'm not going to waste anything. Cement, fly ash, anything. I'm going to make the most optimized mix I can to go out that door. It's kind of what I would call green capitalism. By just trying to be good, profitable companies, we're already approaching sustainable decisions and results. Like, I want to use the least amount of cement. I want to use the most amount of fly ash I can. Well, wait a second. Isn't that sustainable? Yes, it is. So we're already there in terms of that. The only limits I have is when somebody tells me how they want the soup to taste and they tell me what to put in it. If you just tell me you need the soup to taste a certain way, I'm going to use the least amount of things possible to do that. But when you say, oh, well, you have a minimum water cement ratio, you have a minimum cement content, you have a maximum fly ash replacement, my hands get tied very quickly. And so I think it's fascinating when somebody says, you've got to be greener with your mix design. We're already as green as we can be until we hit somebody else. And here's the other thing. If you're poking the grizzly, let's keep going. I am perfectly happy as both an engineer and somebody who owns the mix design to say, hey, if you want full responsibility for the mix designs and its performance, just tell me how you want me to put it together. Be happy to do it. Now, I will challenge you, Seth, as a contractor. Hey, Seth, you're telling me I need 3,000 psi in my concrete. And let's say that you want it in 3 days or 7 days because you want to strip forms. But you say, Rich, I want you to make the mix design look like this. And all of a sudden it goes out there and it looks like you wanted it to look, but it doesn't gain the strength. Seth, if I don't gain the strength that you asked me for, who's responsible at that point? I mean, you're a contractor. Who do you go
if
to
I'm telling
first?
you, yeah, I
That's
go to
right.
Ready Mix guy.
You're coming to me. And again, this is practical, right? We're having a practical conversation. I'm responsible for that performance. So I'm going to optimize that to meet the customer spec, and at the same time, knowing I'm going to be fully responsible if I don't perform. I always use the analogy all the time with somebody says, well, what's it like to be in your business? I said, imagine that you're Sherwin-Williams and somebody comes and buys your paints a wall, and the homeowner comes back and says, I don't like that color. Hey, Sherwin-Williams, you made a mistake. I'm like, wait a second, I'm just Sherwin-Williams. That's what it's like to be in our business, kind of thing. So I am very much of the mind right now that we need to be looking at not just one slice of the sustainability pie when it comes to impacts, and let's just call it carbon impacts. Because I think that's the other thing, Seth, you and I were talking about this, that we have a definition problem. A very good friend of mine, John Belkowitz over at Intelligent Concrete, he and I were chatting about, hey, what is the definition? So I'll give you an example. Right now, if I ask you to go measure the slump of concrete on your job site, chances are, whether your job site is in Florida, Texas, California, New York, they're going to go to ASTM and they're going to follow the standard test method for measuring slump. And it's going to be measured relatively the same way in all of those markets with all of the same equipment, because they're all going to be ACI Field Grade 1 certified. So let's give them that. Now, if you want to change how the slump test is manipulated or performed, you would go to ASTM, you'd go to a meeting, you'd say, I'd like to suggest a change. You'd have a bunch of industry experts weigh in, weigh out, and they would vote. And if it passed, they would make the change, and now you've changed the standard. So my point is that the definition of a slump test is relatively fixed each time, as it's printed. If I asked you and five of your friends or people that you would have on the podcast coming up and say, hey, what is carbon zero? What is carbon neutral? What does sustainable mean? And there were five of us, you'd get six definitions. There's no uniformity right now. There's no single entity or organization people can go to get that. Now, as I mentioned before, the EPDs, environmental product declarations, those are starting to create a uniformity of measurement, but we're still challenged with what does that mean? What do we do with those? We're submitting those you've probably got projects where you've had to collect EPD for concrete or other products. And they're great because you can compare product A to product A 2.0 and go, hey, this one has got a lower impact. Okay, great. It's kind of like reading the ingredients on the back of the cookies I like, right? Double stuffed Oreos have a little bit more calories than regular Oreos. Yeah, okay. Now I know that. Does that mean I'm not going to buy the Oreos? No, I still like the Oreos. And so I think we're kind of in that same spot with concrete. Okay, if I have a choice to buy lower calorie concrete, do I or don't I? Well, I don't know. It depends on how hungry I am and what I need. You need 3,000 psi in 3 days or 3,000 psi in 28 days. So that's kind of our challenge as well, is some of the projects, and Seth, you correct me here if I'm wrong, but on your projects, I don't believe you have 28 days to wait for anything. You want concrete strength in
No.
1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 7 day. You're stripping and lifting and raising forms as fast as you can. So it's interesting to me that we have this sustainability focus and emphasis, but the construction industry itself has also changed. Everything in my experience, in my world right now, in the major concrete construction markets that I'm operating in, is not about how slow can we go. It's about how fast. It's speed, speed, and speed. If you can do it in 3 days, why can't you do it in 2? Do I have the labor? Do I have the people? Do I have the resources? Do I have the things? Can you go on Saturday? I'd rather go on Saturday than Monday. Well, gosh, guys, it's only 2 more days. Nope. If I can pick up 2 days on my schedule, you tell me, Seth, if you can pick up a day a week on a project that's 6 months, what's that worth on your project to pick up time on your schedule? So to me, it's an interesting contrast.
Who's driving this policy? Who's at the top?
I think you've got owners that are doing that, and I also think you've got companies.
But why are they? But what's driving them?
I think it's a regulatory environment, and I think that's part of it. Let's talk about the other elephant in the room, which is cement and cement types, and that's the other thing that has radically changed in the last 24 months is the not only introduction, and I'll use that term loosely because it's been around a long time, but the dominance of the ASTM 595 Type 1L cement. And that has just completely changed the industry, and I've never seen something happen that fast. So again, a little historical context. 20 years ago, you used to be able to get a Type 1 cement, ASTM C150 Type 1 cement. You used to be able to get an ASTM C150 Type 2 cement. They were 2 separate products. And then about 15, 18 years ago, they became a Type 1-2 cement, a lower alkali cement. And then all of a sudden, that's all you could get. In the great state of Texas, I don't think there were, right now there might be one company left, one cement company, but I don't think so, that produced a pure Type 1. Everything else is a 1-2. That took us 15 to 18 years to finally convert over the market to a Type 1-2 cement. And I still to this day would have an engineer look at a submittal going, I can't have a Type 2 cement. No, I want a 1 only. And we said, well, it's a 1-2 cement. No, it's a Type 2. I want a 1 only. And I said, Well, we'll make sure to ship you the one part of the type 1-2. Oh, well, that'll be just fine. You know, well, you come up across 2 years ago, and there were some dynamic things that were happening, and the next thing you know, fast forward to you know Q4 of 2022, the industry is, there's whole states that are 100% type 1L now. There's markets that are almost 100% type 1L now. And that happened in some of those places overnight. I'd be shocked, Seth, if you didn't have a job that you were on or somebody you were working with and said, hey, they just changed the cement type on us halfway through the project. And they told us the other cement is just not available, period. What do you do? Forget about color, or those kind of things. You've had engineers pulling out their hair, didn't know what to do because the cement type just changed. It wasn't there anymore, wasn't available. And the 1L all of a sudden wrap that up with sustainable. And we've got this whole thing about we've got a great approach to carbon reduction because of 1L cement. And it has just dominated the conversations for the last 6 to 12 months. And I think it's going to continue to because a lot of people are in an interesting spot, particularly when you were talking about regulation. I was mentioning regulations, you were saying policy. Well, if you're the FHWA or the federal government or state government or municipal government, you're saying, we want to be more carbon neutral. Who writes the specs for those roads? Who writes the specs for those buildings? Well, you have to use a type 1-2 cement. Well, I thought we were going to be carbon neutral or lower our carbon footprint. Here's a great way to do it with a type 1L cement. Well, we're going to need 2 years of tests. Okay, well then we're just going to no project's going to proceed for 2 years because we don't have any other cement available. So it was fascinating to me to watch some of these groups kind of go, oh, well, I guess we could use that if the concrete keeps coming. So I think we've also challenged convention as to what's important for some of these groups as well. Is it how important is it for us to have a calculation, a measurement, or a piece of paper, or how important is it for us to keep building? So when you've got that kind of people that are saying, well, hey, we need all these tests, the next question is, well, do you want to build something? And Seth, you've probably been in job site trailers, and so have I, where you wind up sitting across the table and you're going, hey, do you want to build something or not? And that's just kind of, I used this analogy before about the shovel. There's two ends of a shovel. Which end are we using here? Because I like to build things. I'd be willing to bet you like to build things. And so a lot of times we've got to make these practical, ground level, in the heat of battle decisions about what we're doing. And I find it fascinating when we're talking about sustainability because the project itself doesn't know whether it's going to be a sustainable project. It just knows that it wants to be built. And so to me, I think we're challenged with that every time we look at a project like this, which is, hey, we're ready to go. We want to build something. The trucks are ready to roll. You've got guys that are out there in the field that want to start doing it. But how are we getting held up on paperwork? So I think that's, again, our challenge. And I think we go back to these definitions because we're still swirling around in this very muddy waters of not only what are we trying to accomplish, but how do we measure it? How do we define it? And what happens if while we're building it, we're not as sustainable as we thought we were going to be? What does that mean? Now, I'll go back to the example I was giving you about strength. So let's say, again, I go back and you want a column, and you've asked me to supply concrete to the column, and your column is 5,000 PSI. And for whatever reason, the concrete comes out 2,000 PSI in the column, okay? And we cord it, and it's still 2,000. Well, what do you want to have done with that column, Seth? You want to have that column, I'm guessing, torn out and replaced. Right? So forget about the discussion of who pays and all that other stuff. It's irrelevant for the point of this example. But there's a definite thing there. It didn't achieve its performance. Now, what happens if I supply concrete to that same column? The strength is there, but it doesn't exactly get to the carbon reduction that it was supposed to. Do we tear the column out? Do we leave the column in place?
Well, how do you measure that?
Well, again, Comes back to the definition kind of thing of like, or let's say, Seth, that it rained for a week and you lost a week on your schedule. And all of a sudden you're like, hey, Rich, we got to pour these columns. But guess what you want to do with those columns, Seth? My guess is you'd want to get accelerated strength on them because you just lost a week on your schedule. Well, Seth, I submitted these mixed designs at the lowest carbon footprint and neutral, green, sustainable metric that we're trying to achieve. Hey, Rich, I appreciate that, but I got to gain a week back on my schedule. Can you get me something that gets 3,000 psi in 24 hours? Sure, Seth, no problem. Happy to do it. You and I do that every day. But what all of a sudden, but that doesn't meet the carbon neutral, net zero, sustainable something. What do we do? And my guess is you're out there in the field, and so am I, and we're going to go, hey, let's build something. Get me to 3,000 psi in 24 hours. Let's get this thing wrapped. Let's get it poured, and let's get this thing deconstructed so we can go on to the next deck. Because that's what we do in the field, and that's how we approach it. I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong on that, but I'd be willing to bet that's exactly how we do
it. Like you said, these are questions probably not having on these jobs because it's so new. So,
right.
I think if you run out of for your example where you're running out of the Type 1L cement, I imagine if you say, hey, there's just no way for us to get our hands on it for whatever reason. I mean, for instance, I talked to someone locally to us, and I asked him about it's a ready mix supplier, and asked him about 1L cement and how the supply is down there, and he's like, we've been using that for years. We use whatever cement's available. So
right. Because they want to build something.
Yeah. So if you run across I guess a project that has these requirements, these what I've been calling carbon credit requirements, and you're say halfway through the job and you run out of that cement, I imagine everybody's going to say, let's figure out how to keep going with what we got. I don't know an owner of a building that's going to say, stop building my building because you're not being as green as we want to be.
Correct.
I don't know.
Well, no, but there's a point, and then the other one is you made a very subtle point there, and I don't want to dismiss that, which is that you have an owner who says, hey, I want to do X, I want to do Y, I want to do Z, I want to do half of A, I want to do a little bit of B, and I really want you to focus on C, D, and E. Versus another owner who goes, oh yeah, just build that for me. Which one of those two jobs would you think might have the lower cost? When somebody starts to put in a whole lot more detail, and again, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but I'm just saying there are also implications from a cost standpoint that nobody talks or thinks about either. I'll go back to my analogy because it'll be a little bit cleaner for us. Tell me how you want the soup to taste. Don't tell me what to put in it. Because as soon as you start to tell me what I've got to put in the soup to make it taste that way, we've all been to restaurants with those people that like soup a certain way and they want to tell you what to put in it. When that bill comes at the end, tell me which one of those soups is going to be more expensive. And then comes the ultimate question of, if the soup doesn't taste the way it was supposed to, but you told me what to put in it, who's responsible?
Yeah. So I think what we're getting at is the instructions are coming from maybe someone that's far apart from what's happening on the ground. Maybe too far.
Yeah.
They don't understand what they're asking for.
I think that's part of it. And then let's go one step further. So we've been talking about the concrete aspect of it, right? Just the actual 1 cubic yard from a design standpoint. Now let's step back from that and let's say, well, how does that cubic yard of concrete get to the job? Well, we all know it goes in a big truck. Once it gets there and it comes out of the truck, how does it actually get installed? Well, that's where you take over, Seth, and your guys are going to install that with concrete pumps or conveyors or buck cranes and buckets. And then once it's in place, you're going to use laser screeds. And then once it's there, you're going to use hard trowels and those kind of things. And then that structure is finally complete, relatively. Well, what happens if you have somebody who says you can only work so many hours per day? I'm not saying the driver's hours or those kind of things, but there's a, say, municipal curfew. Have you run into one of those yet? Wait a second. You want us to build something and reduce the carbon footprint, but you're telling us we only have so many hours per day in which to do it, which means we're going to be spending more days constructing. So I can provide you the lowest carbon footprint concrete possible. And we've made all of these great choices about how to do that. You're happy with it. The engineers are happy with it. The consultants are happy with it. But then all of a sudden, you run headlong into somebody who says, oh, yeah, you can only build for between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., which also happens to be the peak time of emissions, carbon monoxide emissions during the day. So we're going to further concentrate them by having a bunch of diesel engines running. And because we can only work so many hours per day, that 1,200-yard pour you wanted to do, we're going to have to break up into 3 1,500-yard pours over 3 days. You're going to have a pump out there for more hours. You're going to have those trowels out there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now tell me again how we reduce the carbon footprint of that pour with a curfew. Right? So, all of a sudden now that sustainable approach that we were all behind, we've just lost and moved backwards on. So again,
but I don't think they're measuring it. Yeah, I don't think they're measuring it that way. They're measuring it by the pieces of paper that we give them.
But remember one of the first statements I made. How does this cubic yard of concrete reduce climate change? Okay, so let's have that conversation if you want to, but you can't just look at the discrete element. Concrete is one of those very few products that it has to be manufactured, it has to be transported, it has to be installed. And as it's doing that, not only is it changing form and it's changing its strengths and it's all of these type of workabilities and performance characteristics, but every time you touch that thing, you have to do it with either labor or some type of energy fueled labor that adds to the exact impact you're trying to reduce. So it's a bigger question. And I get asked all the time, hey, Rich, how can we help this? Well, first, my thing is, how often does your company, does my company, does our industry provide feedback on specifications that municipalities or building codes or construction limitations that are regulated by somebody other than you or me, like the city of X, the county of Y, the state of Z, that tells us how we have to construct something. And most of those things have never been examined for decades, if not longer. So I get challenged with that all the time. Hey, we want to build this thing. Okay, well, we only get 10 hours per day that we can build 5 days a week. Do the math. This project is now going to take X amount of months, and that includes, weather. You layer onto that labor issues, supply issues, fuel issues. I look at it and I say the best construction project is the safest one that gets built the fastest, period. And I'd be willing to bet you agree as a contractor. Make it safe and get it done as quickly as possible. To me, both of those things are right in line with being sustainable.
Yeah. So maybe when we, the general contractors or the developers, owners of these projects, when they ask us what are our ways of being more sustainable, maybe those are the things that we need to suggest. Like,
Right.
let us work these different hours so we can, shorten the duration of the project, which again, you're saying, that's less time equipment and things are running. So yeah, I just think we got to
Well,
change our mindset of how we're approaching this, especially now. I think we both agree that it's not truly defined, so we could kind of, I don't know, steer in our direction as far as what we think would have the best impact. Because I think folks get the impression that we don't care as an industry, but that's just the opposite. And your point at the beginning, at the point of the beginning of this, was that you can't be a profitable business if you're not thinking that way from the get-go. So I think you've made. Go
think
ahead.
about how our industry, your company, my company, has approached safety in the last 20 years. Where you Seth, you may not be of the age to remember this, but I am. There was a point in time where we would go to job sites and people didn't have hard hats; they wore ball caps. And we, somewhere along the way, we found religion and we said, hey, safety is a number one priority for our industry, your company, my company. We want to protect people. We value our employees, but we also figured out that profitable companies are safe companies, and safe companies are profitable companies. There was an inherent goodness to that, not just for the employee's benefit, but for the company's benefit. So we said that, we approached it that way. This whole approach to being green and sustainable, to your point, we care about this more than people understand, because not only is it good for our companies and our people, there's a profit there as well for us. Being a green company, being a sustainable company, it gives us a better opportunity to be a profitable company. So yeah, we care about this stuff. We believe it. We have found the religion. It's just amazing to me that you run into it and you're like, hey, we want you to be green, but only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. What? Those kind of limitations. Let's go back to that point I was making. So you as a contractor, you're doing something in between midnight and 6 a.m. I can get you 120 yards an hour plus. You can blow and go. You're going to love that. Your guys are going to go, hell yeah, give me all I can get. Starting at 7 a.m., you're going to go down to 50 yards an hour. You're going to say, where's my 120 yards an hour? Well, you and I both know what happens at 7 a.m. in almost every metro area, even minor metro area. And you're going to get 50 yards an hour, and maybe by 10 a.m., I'll get you back up to 60 or 70 yards an hour. Where would your guys rather be placing concrete? 50 yards an hour? Or do you want to be at 120 yards an hour? Mm-hmm. I'll ask you another question. You're in Florida. Ask any one of your labor guys, hey, where do you want to be working? Do you want to be working when it's 95 degrees and 105% humidity? Or do you rather work in 68 degrees with 50% humidity? What's better? What's safer for our laborers, of which we have a tremendous shortage of? And I'll give you one more. Here's my best one. And I know this is very, very political, but I'm going for it because you poked the grizzly. Our industry is a fantastic place for people to have skilled labor jobs and develop skilled labor careers. We are front and center on that. How do you attract people to an industry, to a market, where you tell them, we would love to have your skilled labor, we'd love to develop you and give you a career, but you can only work so many hours a day? How do you attract somebody into an industry that tells people that? Now, our industry doesn't, but we're regulated that way. And I'm not saying like the federal regulation on driver's hours. I get that. I'm saying, how do I attract a guy in, say, Dallas, Texas, where the municipality we're working in says you can only work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's it. That includes unloading your truck. That includes unloading the boom arms on the pump that can't even start until 7 a.m., which means you're not pumping concrete until 8:30 and the trucks arrive at 50 yards an hour. How do you do that, recruit and retain labor in a market like that? Short answer is you don't. You lose labor. So these are all those kind of things that they're all wrapped and tied together, and it's our daily challenge, right? To deal with this stuff. And I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but to me, it's connected. If we're trying to come all the way and circle back to how we produce sustainable projects with sustainable concrete, is we can't stay at that 30,000-foot view. We've got to get granular and down at the ground level. Your friend who originally referenced probably heard me use this line before, which is sometimes we design things with a micrometer, but in the field we kick it in with a boot. So we've always got to remember that, that aspect of our business. Looks great on paper, but how am I going to build this thing with those kind of requirements, restrictions, or specifications? So sorry, I was rambling there. You get me fired up over stuff like that, Seth.
No, that's great. I think for today we'll end the conversation. I think we need to, if you would like, come back on the podcast. That I think we need to explore this a little bit further. I would, Rich, would you, as far as what we can do as folks in the industry, I think we need to make take the things that you brought up today, the challenges that we're having today, and the logic behind what we're trying to achieve as far as being sustainable, and pointing out those things that are blocking us from being more sustainable. Yes. Limiting hours, limiting our ability to change mixed design, those type of things.
And change those mixed designs rapidly as field conditions dictate.
And so essentially stop telling us what to put in the soup. If you just tell us what you want it tastes like.
There you go.
All right, Rich. If folks want to reach out to you and talk more about this and everything else you in your world, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Probably via email. So it's rszecsy, so rszecsy at alamoconcrete.com.
All right, and we'll put that in the show notes so everybody can reach out to Rich and poke the grizzly bear a little bit more. So thanks again, everyone, and Rich, hold tight. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Concrete Logic Podcast. Thank you for joining us for another Concrete Logic Podcast episode. If you got some value out of this or you enjoyed it, please share it with others. And if you could take a moment and give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app, I would appreciate it. We will catch you on the next episode. And now Mike Dunton's going to take us out. Thanks.
Ring, ring, that alarm always sings. Couple hours before the sun comes up. Open up the side, put some diesel in the lights, and wait till the trucks roll up. Yeah, this ain't how most folks live their lives, dripping in sweat, working overtime. But while they're tying their ties for their 9 to 5s, we're out here changing these skylines with wood, iron, and mud. We work hard for $1, give thanks to the Lord above. Something you can't prove. Hard work calls for a drink or two. Expect more, it's written in our blood. With wood, iron, and mud. From the swamps to the city, from the Lone Star heat to the woods of the Georgia pine. Good old boys and girls who ain't afraid of getting dirty for a clean time. And if you want to see the fire in a grown man's eyes beneath the hot sun summer sun. Wild-eyed boys clocking days and nights, working hard to